Hey guys, so we are back again today. Today we are going to be reading chapters 3 through 5. I just gave her 2 carrots and she's like, where are the rest of them? But we're back again. I wish that I could be in class with all of you and I miss seeing all of you every day. But I am going to show you a picture that my mom showed me and I think it's very true right now. So to recap, chapters 1 and chapters 2 were her finding Winn-Dixie in the store and then taking Winn-Dixie home to her father, who's a pastor. And so now today we are going to be starting with chapter 3, Because of Winn-Dixie, by Kate DiCamillo. Chapter 3. I started in on Winn-Dixie right away, trying to clean him up. First, I gave him a bath. I used the garden hose and some baby shampoo. He stood still for it, but I could tell he didn't like it. He looked insulted, and the whole time he didn't show me his teeth or wag his tail once. After he was all washed and dried, I brushed him good. I used my own hairbrush and worked real hard at all the knots and patches of fur stuck together. He didn't mind being brushed. He wiggled his back like it felt pretty good. The whole time I was working on him, I was talking to him, and he listened. I told him how we were alike. See, I said, you don't have any family, and neither do I. I've got the preacher, of course, but I don't have a mama. I mean, I have one, but I don't know where she is. She left when I was 3 years old. I can hardly remember her, and I bet you don't remember your mama much either. So, we're almost like orphans. Winn-Dixie looked straight at me when I said that to him, like he was feeling relieved to finally have somebody understand his situation. I nodded my head at him and went on talking. I don't even have any friends because I had to leave them all behind when we moved here from Whately. Whately is up in North Florida. Have you ever been to North Florida? Winn-Dixie looked down at the ground like he was trying to remember if he had. You know what I said? Ever since we moved here, I've been thinking about my mama extra hard. More than I ever did when I was in Whately. Winn-Dixie twitched his ears and raised his eyebrows. I think the preacher thinks about my mama all the time, too. He's still in love with her. I know that because I heard the ladies at the church in Whately talking about him. They said he's still hoping she'll come back, but he doesn't tell me that. He won't talk to me about her at all. I want to know more about her, but I'm afraid to ask the preacher. I'm afraid he'll get mad at me. Winn-Dixie looked at me hard, like he was trying to say something. What? I said. He stared at me. You think I should make the preacher tell me about her? Winn-Dixie looked at me so hard he sneezed. I'll think about it, I said. When I was done working on him, Winn-Dixie looked a whole lot better. He still had his bald spots, but the fur that he did have cleaned up nice. It was all shiny and soft. You could still see his ribs, but I intended to feed him good, and that would take care of that. I couldn't do anything about his crooked yellow teeth because he got into a sneezing fit every time I started brushing them with my toothbrush, and I finally had to give up. But for the most part, he looked a whole lot better, and so I took him into the trailer and showed him to the preacher. Daddy, I said. He said. He was working on a sermon and kind of muttering to himself. Daddy, I wanted to show you the new Winn-Dixie. The preacher put down his pencil and rubbed his nose, and finally he looked up. Well, he said, smiling real big at Winn-Dixie. Well now, don't you look handsome? Winn-Dixie smiled at the preacher. He went over and put his head in the preacher's lap. He smells nice, too, said the preacher. He rubbed Winn-Dixie's head and looked into his eyes. Daddy, I said, real quick before I lost all my nerve, I've been talking to Winn-Dixie. Is that right? The preacher said. He scratched Winn-Dixie's head. I've been talking to him, and he agreed with me that since I'm 10 years old, you should tell me 10 things about my mama. Just 10 things. That's all. The preacher stopped rubbing Winn-Dixie's head and held real still. I could see him thinking about pulling his head back into his shell. One thing for each year I have been alive, I told him. Please? Winn-Dixie looked up at the preacher and kind of gave him a nudge with his nose. The preacher sighed. He said to Winn-Dixie, I should have guessed you were going to be trouble. Then he looked at me. Come on, Opal, he said. Sit down, and I will tell you 10 things about your mama. Chapter 4. 1, said the preacher. We were sitting on the couch, and Winn-Dixie was sitting between us. Winn-Dixie had already decided that he liked the couch a lot. "One," said the preacher again. Winn-Dixie looked at him kind of hard. "Your mamma was funny. She could make just about anybody laugh." "Two," he said. "She had red hair and freckles." "Just like me," I said. "Just like you," the preacher nodded. Three, she liked to plant things. She had a talent for it. She could stick a tire in the ground and grow a car. When Dixie started chewing on his paw, I tapped him on the head to make him stop. Four, said the preacher. She could run fast. If you were racing her, you couldn't ever let her get a head start, because she would beat you for sure. I'm that way too, I said. Back home in Watley, I raced Liam Fullerton and beat him, and he said it wasn't fair, because boys and girls shouldn't race each other to begin with. I told him he was just a sore loser. The preacher nodded. He was quiet for a minute. I'm ready for number 5, I told him. 5, he said. She couldn't cook. She burned everything, including water. She had a hard time opening a can of beans. She couldn't make head nor tail of a piece of meat. 6. The preacher rubbed his nose and looked up at the ceiling. Winn-Dixie looked up too. Number 6 is that your mama loved a story. She would sit and listen to stories all day long. She loved to be told a story. She especially liked funny ones, stories that made her laugh. The preacher nodded his head like he was agreeing with himself. What's number 7, I asked. Let's see, he said. She knew all the constellations, every planet in the nighttime sky, every last one of them. She could name them and point them out, and she never got tired of looking up at them. Number 8, said the preacher, with his eyes closed, was that she hated being a preacher's wife. She said she just couldn't stand having the ladies at church judge what she was wearing and what she was cooking and how she was singing. She said it made her feel like a bug under a microscope. When Dixie lay down on the couch, he put his nose in the preacher's lap and his tail in mine. 10, said the preacher. 9, I told him. 9, said the preacher. She drank. She drank beer and whiskey and wine. Sometimes she couldn't stop drinking, and that made me and your mama fight quite a bit. Number 10, he said with a long sigh. Number 10 is that your mama loved you. She loved you very much. But she left me, I told him. She left us, said the preacher softly. I could see him pulling his old turtle head back into his stupid turtle shell. She packed her bags and left us, and she didn't leave one thing behind. Okay, I said. I got up off the couch. Winn-Dixie hopped off too. Thank you for telling me, I said. I went back to my room and wrote down all 10 things that the preacher had told me. I wrote them down just the way he said them to me so that I wouldn't forget them, and then I read them out loud to Winn-Dixie until I had them memorized. I wanted to know those 10 things inside and out. That way, if my mom ever came back, I could recognize her, and I would be able to grab her and hold on to her tight and not let her get away from me again. Chapter 5. When Dixie couldn't stand to be left alone, we found that out real quick. If me and the preacher went off and left him by himself in the trailer, he pulled all the cushions off the couch and all the toilet paper off the roll. So we started tying him up outside with the rope when we left. That didn't work either. Winn-Dixie howled until Samuel, Mrs. Detweller's dog, started howling too. It was exactly the kind of noise that people in an all-adult trailer park do not like to hear. He just doesn't want to be left alone, I told the preacher. That's all. Let's take him with us. I could understand the way Winn-Dixie felt. Getting left behind probably made his heart feel empty. After a while, the preacher gave in, and everywhere we went, we took Winn-Dixie, even to church. The Open Arms Baptist Church of Naomi isn't a regular-looking church. The building used to be a Pick It Quick store, and when you walk in the front door, the first thing is you see the Pick It Quick motto. It's written on the floor in little tiny red tiles that make great big letters that say, Pick, 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 quick, quick, quick. The preacher tried painting over those tiles, but the letters won't stay covered up, and so the preacher has just given up and let them be. The other thing about the Open Arms that is different from other churches is that there aren't any pews. In their own fold-up chairs and lawn chairs, and so sometimes it looks more like the congregation is watching a parade or sitting at a barbecue instead of being at a church. It's kind of a strange church, and I thought Winn-Dixie would fit right in. But the first time we brought Winn-Dixie to the Open Arms, the preacher tied him outside the front door. Why did we bring him all the way here just to tie him up? I asked the preacher. Because dogs don't belong in church, Opal, the preacher said. That's why. He tied Winn-Dixie up to a tree and said how there was lots of shade for him and that it ought to work out real good. Well, it didn't. The service started and there was some singing and some sharing and some praying, and then the preacher started preaching, and he wasn't but 2 or 3 words into his sermon when there was a terrible howl coming from outside. The preacher tried to ignore it. Today, he said. "Aroo," said Winn-Dixie. "Please," said the preacher. "Aroo," said Winn-Dixie back. "Friends," said the preacher. "Aroo," wailed Winn-Dixie. Everyone turned in their lawn chairs and fold-up chairs and looked at one another. "Opal," said the preacher. "Ow," said Winn-Dixie. "Yes, sir," I said. "Go get that dog," he yelled. "Yes, sir," I yelled back. I went outside and untied Winn-Dixie and brought him inside, and he sat down beside me and smiled up at the preacher, and the preacher couldn't help it. He smiled back. Winn-Dixie had that effect on him. Until the preacher started in preaching again, Winn-Dixie sat there listening to it, wiggling his ears this way and that, trying to catch all the words, and everything would have been all right except that a mouse ran across the floor. The Open Arms had mice. They were there from when it was a picket quick, and there were lots of good things to eat in the building. And when the picket quick became the Open Arms Baptist Church of Naomi, the mice stayed around to eat all the leftover crumbs from the potluck suppers. The preacher kept on saying that he was going to have to do something about them, but he never did. Because the truth is, he couldn't stand the thought of hurting anything, even a mouse. Well, Winn-Dixie saw that mouse, and he was up and after him. One minute everything was quiet and serious, and the preacher was going on and on and on, and the next minute Winn-Dixie looked like a furry bullet shooting across the building, chasing that mouse. He was barking and his feet were skidding all over the polished picket quick floor, and people were clapping and hollering and pointing. They really went wild when Winn-Dixie caught the mouse. "I've never in my life seen a dog catch a mouse," said Mrs. Nordley. She was sitting next to me. "He's a special dog," I told her. "I imagine so," she said back. Winn-Dixie stood up there in the front of the whole church, wagging his tail and holding the mouse real careful in his mouth, holding on to him tight, but not squishing him. "I believe that mutt has got some retriever in him," said somebody behind me. "That's a hunting dog." Winn-Dixie took the mouse over to the preacher and dropped it at his feet, and when the mouse tried to get away, Winn-Dixie put his paw right on the mouse's tail. Then he smiled up at the preacher. He showed him all his teeth. The preacher looked down at the mouse. He looked at Winn-Dixie. He looked at me. He rubbed his nose. It got real quiet in the picket quick. "Let us pray," the preacher finally said, "for this mouse." And everybody started laughing and clapping. The preacher picked up the mouse by the tail and walked and threw it out the front door of the picket quick, and everybody applauded again. And he came back and we all prayed together. I prayed for my mama. I told God how much she would have enjoyed hearing the story of Winn-Dixie catching that mouse. It would have made her laugh. I asked God if maybe I could be the one to tell her that story someday. And then I talked to God about how I was lonely in Naomi because I didn't know that many kids, only the ones from church. And there aren't that many kids at the Open Arms, just Dunlap and Stevie Dewberry, 2 brothers who weren't twins but looked like they were, and Amanda Wilkinson, whose face always pinched up like she was smelling something real bad, and Sweetie Pie Thomas, who was only 5 years old and still mostly a baby. And none of them wanted to be my friend anyway because they thought I'd tell on them to the preacher for every little thing they did wrong, and then they would get in trouble with God and their parents. So I told God that I was lonely, even having Winn-Dixie. And finally, I prayed for the mouse, like the preacher suggested. I prayed that he didn't get hurt when he was flying out the door of the Open Arms Baptist Church of Naomi. I prayed that he landed on a nice soft patch of grass. That concludes chapters 3, 4, and 5. I am going to be posting some questions on another Google form, and there will also be a response question so you guys can type a journal question into the question that I post on Google Forms, so be looking out for that.